The certified letter came on December 23rd, tucked under my windshield wiper in the parking garage beneath my building. And by the time I got to the second paragraph, I had forgotten how to breathe. I stood there in the cold concrete dark with my coffee going lukewarm in my other hand, reading the words defendant and personal guarantor, and a number with a comma in it that did not belong anywhere near my name. $310,000. A defaulted SBA loan for a company called Cascade Holdings and Supply LLC, a company I had never heard of. A company that, according to the filing, I co-owned. I'm a structural engineer. I spend my days making sure parking garages don't pancake during an earthquake and that the pedestrian bridges over I-5 don't shed pieces onto the cars below. My whole life is signatures and stamps and the assumption that when you put your name on something, you mean it. So when I saw my name on that filing, my full legal name, the one I only use on my PE license and my mortgage, something in me went very quiet and very sharp at the same time. Because here's what it actually meant. A default like this, attached to a business entity tied to my licensure, doesn't just wreck my credit. It can land in front of the state board. There's a line on every renewal about financial responsibility, about conduct. I had spent 11 years getting that license, 11 years of all-nighters and field reviews and a salary that finally let me stop counting. And someone had just put all of it on a table and lit a match under it. Have you ever been the only person in your family who reads the fine print? Stay with me because it gets worse before it gets better. I drove up to my apartment with my hands shaking, not from fear, from something colder. On my kitchen counter, next to the laptop where I'd already pulled up the county records, sat a different piece of paper. A printed Venmo receipt, $4,000, sent 11 days earlier to my mother, marked in the little memo field with a snowflake emoji and the words, roof repair. Thank you, sweetheart. The roof on the house in Bend, the house she calls the family home, the house she trots out in her Christmas cards like it's a magazine spread, like it isn't held up entirely by money that came out of my account. I stared at that receipt and I started doing the thing I do when a building is failing. I started tracing the load path. Where does the weight actually go? And for the first time in my life, I let myself follow it all the way down. It went back years. The $2,000 from my brother's podcast studio, the one that recorded 4 episodes about hustle culture, and then became a very expensive room full of foam panels. The $8,000 for his ghost kitchen, a delivery-only taco concept that existed for exactly one health inspection. The bracelet my mother wore to the hospital fundraiser, the one I paid for, the one she described to the whole table as a gift from a dear old friend. The dental work, the property taxes, twice. The time my brother totaled his truck and somehow it was understood, without anyone ever quite saying it, that I would handle the down payment on the next one. I had always paid. I paid to make the phone stop ringing at 11 at night. I paid to skip the part where my mother cried and asked if I even loved this family. I paid because saying no felt like detonating something, and I am a person who builds things, not a person who blows them up. And I finally understood the math of it, standing in my own kitchen on the longest night of the year. In a family like mine, being the capable one isn't a source of pride. It's a utility. My mother didn't see a daughter who'd made something of herself. She saw a line of credit with a face. The better I did, the more they took, because competence in that house was never celebrated, it was billed. I wasn't the successful one. I was the account they drew down whenever the performance of being fine got too expensive to keep up. My phone buzzed on the counter. My brother, Mom says you got some legal thing. It's honestly not a big deal. You're being dramatic. Call her. You're stressing her out at Christmas. Stressing her out at Christmas. My license was on the chopping block and I was the one stressing her out. A second text. This one from my mother. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you are humiliating this family. You will call me tonight and you will fix this. Not I'm sorry. Not, oh my God, how did this happen? Not even who did this to you. Just fix this, like I was the leak and not the one who'd been drowning. I read it twice. The shaking in my hands stopped completely. Something settled in me, flat and level, the way a foundation cures. They thought I was the emergency fund. They were about to learn I read structural reports for a living, and I had just found the crack. I didn't text my mother back. I didn't call my brother. I opened my laptop and I called a woman named Priya. Priya is not the lawyer you call when your family is being difficult. She's a forensic litigator, fraud, forgery, asset tracing, the unglamorous machinery underneath every family that looks perfect in its Christmas card. We'd met years ago when she gave a continuing education talk on construction lien fraud, and I'd asked a question that made her laugh. We weren't close, but I'd kept her number, the way you keep a fire extinguisher you hope you never need. She picked up on the second ring, even though it was almost 10 at night, 2 days before Christmas. "It's me," I said. "I have a problem, and it's the kind you handle." I told her about the filing, the 310,000, the company I'd never heard of, my name as personal guarantor and co-member, the PE license sitting on top of it all like a roof I couldn't afford to lose. There was a pause, and then the sound of typing. "Who else is on the entity?" she asked. "My mother, and my brother." "And the signature?" "It's not mine," I said. "I never signed anything. I've never even seen these documents." "Okay," she said, and her voice changed, dropped into something brisk and almost gentle, the voice I use myself when a homeowner is panicking about a foundation and I need them to trust me. "Here's what we do tonight. We freeze your credit, all 3 bureaus. I'm going to draft an affidavit of forgery. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing for a temporary restraining order, and I'm pulling the full loan file, the formation documents, the notary log, everything. You're going to send me that filing right now. And you are not going to talk to your mother or your brother. Not a word. Understood?" "Understood," I said. I hung up. I made a new folder on my encrypted drive, and I named it, and I dragged the filing and the Venmo receipt and the screenshots of those 2 text messages into it. It wasn't a family. It was a case. I was done pretending otherwise. Priya called back the next morning, Christmas Eve at 7. I was already awake. I'd been awake all night. "I have the loan file," she said. "2 things. First, the signature on the guarantee is a forgery, and it's a clean one, which actually helps us. It's a tracing, not a freehand attempt, so we can prove intent. Second." She stopped. "Second what?" "The loan wasn't originated through your mother. The application, the broker correspondence, the entity formation, the person who set all of it up, whose name is on every piece of the paperwork as the managing member, is someone named W. Hollis." Another pause. "Tessa, who is W. Hollis?" I sat down on the edge of my bed. The room tilted, very slightly, the way it does in a high building when the wind catches it. "That's my grandfather," I said. "Walter Hollis. But that's not possible. My grandfather has dementia. He's been in memory care for 3 years. My mother has power of attorney over everything. He doesn't know what year it is. He can't have set up a company. He can barely." "When's the last time you saw him?" Priya asked. I opened my mouth and nothing came out, because the answer was, I hadn't. Not in 3 years. My mother had handled all of it, the placement, the facility, the visits. "You don't want to see him like this," she'd told me at the time, her hand on my arm, her eyes wet. "He wouldn't even know you. It would just break your heart. Let me carry this one." And I had been so grateful, so relieved to have one thing in that family I didn't have to carry, that I'd never once questioned it. "He's not who you think he is right now," Priya said carefully. "I ran him. There's no guardianship on file. No conservatorship. The power of attorney your mother holds, it's based on a physician's competency declaration, and I'm looking at it, and it was signed by a doctor who surrendered his license 18 months later. Tessa." She took a breath. "Your grandfather has an attorney of record on this loan. A real one. And that attorney called me back 20 minutes ago. Walter wants to meet you. He's in town. He's been in town for a while." I drove to Priya's office through a city decorated for a holiday I no longer felt part of. The whole way there, I kept thinking about the version of my grandfather I'd been handed. The shell, the empty chair, the tragedy my mother wore like a medal. "I do everything for that man and he doesn't even know my name." She'd said that at Thanksgiving, dabbing her eyes, and 3 people had reached across the table to comfort her. He was sitting in the glass conference room when I got there, and he was not a shell. He was 81, and he sat the way men of that generation sit when they've spent a lifetime expecting rooms to come to order around them. A gray suit that fit him. A watch I half remembered. His hands were folded on the table and they were steady, and when he looked up at me his eyes were so clear and so present that I had to grab the back of a chair. "Look at you," he said quietly. "You've got your father's hands. Engineer's hands. He'd have been so proud, he can't even." He stopped himself, pressed his lips together. "Sit down, sweetheart, you're white as a sheet." I sat. "They told me you didn't know who I was," I said. My voice came out small. "For 3 years they told me you were gone." "I know they did." Something moved across his face, grief and fury braided together. "That was the story your mother needed. It was cleaner than the truth." And then he told me the truth, and I watched my entire childhood get rewritten in real time. He'd started the business, Hollis Tool and Manufacturing, a precision machining shop outside Bend that had grown, over 40 years, into something that quietly supplied half the aerospace contractors in the Northwest. My father had worked beside him. When my father died, suddenly, when I was 23, the plan had always been that the business and everything under it would be held in trust, managed for the family, kept whole. My grandfather wanted to build. He wanted it to outlast all of them. My mother wanted it liquidated. She wanted the cash, the house, the lifestyle, the standing. And when he wouldn't agree, she found a doctor who would sign a piece of paper for the right consideration, and she walked into a courtroom with a competency declaration and the story about a confused old man who'd started leaving the stove on. And she came out holding power of attorney over a man whose mind was as sharp as a set of calipers. "She put me in that facility," he said, "and she told everyone I was gone, and then she started spending. Slowly at first, then not so slowly. She's been bleeding the estate dry for 3 years, sweetheart, and she's been doing it in my name and yours." I felt sick. "You knew," I said. "You knew this whole time. You knew she was using me. Why would you let her put my name on a loan? Why would you set up that company at all?" He looked at me for a long moment, and what was in his face wasn't guilt. It was something harder and more deliberate. "Because you weren't ready," he said. "Ready for what?" "To stop paying." He leaned forward and his voice dropped. "Tessa, I've watched you for 3 years from inside that place. I had a phone they didn't know about, a friend on the staff. I watched the whole thing. I watched you write check after check. I watched you bail your brother out of every idiot scheme. I watched you pay your mother's lies and apologize for it. And every time I wanted to pick up that phone and tell you the truth, I knew exactly what would happen. You'd feel sorry for her. You'd want to fix it quietly, keep the peace, protect the family. You'd hand her the money to make it go away, and you'd go right back to being the wall holding up a house that should have been condemned 20 years ago. He tapped the table once. "I didn't set up that company to hurt you. I set it up because I knew, sooner or later, she'd reach for the one thing she couldn't replace. Your name, your license, your future. And I knew that the day she did, you would finally stop being sorry. That loan wasn't the trap closing on you, sweetheart. It was the alarm telling me you were ready to fight." I didn't know what to say. 3 days before Christmas, in a glass room, an old man I'd been told was empty had just handed me back my own life. And then he gave me the second half of it. "There's a trust," he said, "the one my brother and I, your great-uncle and I, set up 40 years ago to hold everything. Your mother's whole life runs on a distribution from that trust. The house, the cars, the standing at the country club, the donations she makes so people will call her generous. All of it is an allowance, and I am still the trustee because the one thing she could never forge was the trust instrument itself." He almost smiled. "And that instrument has a clause. We wrote it after we watched 2 other families tear themselves apart. If any beneficiary commits fraud, forgery, or a financial crime against another beneficiary, their entire interest is forfeited. Permanently. No appeal." It took me a second. Then it landed. "She forged my signature," I said slowly, "on a loan. Against me." "Against a fellow beneficiary," he said. "She didn't just hand you a weapon, Tessa. She handed me the one that ends it. She just didn't know I was still holding the other end." The restraining order and the credit freeze hit my family like a power outage. For 3 days, there was nothing, no texts, no calls. I spent Christmas alone in my apartment with Priya's case files spread across my coffee table, and it was the most peaceful holiday I'd had in a decade. Then, the day after Christmas, somebody knocked on my door. Not the lobby buzzer. The door to my unit, 12 floors up. past a security desk I'd thought was secure. I looked through the peephole. It was my mother. She had never once in 3 years driven 3 hours from Bend to see me. She did not look like the woman from the Christmas cards. Her hair was flat on one side. She had on the expensive wool coat she wore to church, but it was wrinkled, like she'd slept in the car. The mask was gone. Underneath it was the person who'd been there the whole time, grasping and frightened and furious that the machine had finally stopped giving. I opened the door. I didn't open it wide. I stood in the gap with my body, the way you stand in a doorway when you've decided the room behind you is no longer for sale. Sweetheart, she breathed, and she actually reached for me and she tried to step past me into the apartment like the floor under my feet belonged to her. Thank God. We have to talk. You have to stop this. That man, Walter, whatever he's told you, he's not well, he's manipulating you. You don't know what he's capable of. You put him in a home, I said, with a doctor you bought. Her face did something complicated. The tears came up fast on cue the way they always did. You don't understand the position I was in. After your father died, somebody had to make the hard choices. Somebody had to protect this family, and it was always me. It was always on me, and now you want to throw all of it away because some old man filled your head with. You forged my name, I said. It came out flat and clinical, and it stopped her cold. Her tears were still running, but her mouth had gone slack. You forged my name on a $300,000 loan, I went on, and you put my license at risk, and you did it on purpose, and the only reason you're standing in my doorway right now is that the money finally stopped and you cannot stand it. It was paperwork, she whispered. The word came out of her like something rehearsed. It was just paperwork, Tessa. It was to help your brother. You have so much. You've always had so much. You just needed an asset, I said. You needed an asset. And when I stopped volunteering, you decided to take one by force. She switched. Then, the way she always did, the grief evaporating into something older and harder. You will fix this, she said, her voice rising. You will call that lawyer and you will call Walter and you will tell them to stop. Tonight, do you hear me? You are tearing this family apart after everything I gave up for you. No, I said. I had never said that word to my mother and meant it, not in 32 years. It didn't feel like an explosion. It felt like a wall finally coming down off my back. No, I said again, and I reached behind the door and picked up the envelope Priya had couriered to me that morning, and I held it out. These are your choices, not mine. Inside was a copy of my grandfather's sworn affidavit and the trust instrument and the page with the clause on it highlighted. You're not upset that you did something wrong. You're upset that someone finally read the fine print. She took the envelope with shaking hands. She read the first page. I watched her get to the clause, and I watched the blood leave her face, because that was the one thing she hadn't known. I knew that the forgery hadn't just failed, it had cost her everything. You don't know what you've done, she said very quietly. I do, actually. I stepped back. I cut a load off a structure that was never sound. Drive safe, it's icy. I closed the door. It didn't slam. It clicked, soft and final, like a vault ceiling. I stood with my back against it and listened to her stand out there in the hallway for a full minute, not moving. Then I heard her walk to the elevator. I picked up my phone and opened the building's resident app, and I scrolled to the guest list, and I found her name on my approved access list, added years ago, back when I still thought family meant safe, and I deleted it. A few seconds later, my phone pinged with a security alert from the front desk. A guest had been denied elevator access on my floor. I watched the little notification glow and then I turned my phone face down. The hearing was in February, and it was not a fight. It was a controlled demolition. My mother and my brother showed up with a lawyer who looked like he'd taken the case before he understood it. He tried misunderstanding. He tried grieving family. He tried to paint me as the cold, ungrateful daughter who'd let an outsider poison her against the woman who raised her. And then Priya stood up and, without ever raising her voice, took the whole thing apart joint by joint. She put up the forged guarantee next to my notarized real signature, and the difference was obvious to anyone with eyes. She put up the bank records, the $4,000 for the roof, the $8,000 for the taco kitchen, the steady drip of withdrawals from an estate that wasn't hers to drain. She put up the surrendered medical license of the doctor who declared my grandfather incompetent. She put up the original trust instrument, the formation papers for the machining company my grandfather had built with his hands, and finally the clause itself, in plain black ink: any act of fraud against a fellow beneficiary shall result in immediate and irrevocable forfeiture. And she put my grandfather on the stand. Clear-eyed, steady-handed, 81 years old, and sharper than anyone in the room. He answered every question in a flat, calm voice, and when the family's lawyer suggested he was confused, my grandfather looked at him and recited the serial numbers of 3 machines he'd bought in 1986. The judge didn't quite smile, but it was close. It took the court 40 minutes. The loan was declared void as to me, forged, fraudulent, unenforceable. My name was ordered scrubbed from every document. My license was safe. The fraud against me was referred to the district attorney's office for criminal review, which is a sentence I will remember for the rest of my life, because for the first time my mother understood that fix this wasn't a thing she got to say anymore. The competency declaration was vacated and my grandfather's full rights restored, and the trust clause was activated, my mother's interest forfeited permanently. The allowance that funded her entire performance of a life, gone in a single afternoon. I watched her face as it happened. That face had run our family for 2 decades. It had charmed church committees and intimidated waiters and produced tears precisely when tears were useful. And it just collapsed. The pillar of the community, standing in an empty courtroom with nothing left to hold up. My brother sat next to her, and he wasn't crying for her. He was crying for the money. I could see it. The lifestyle was over, and that was the only loss he could feel. I felt no joy. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect this part to feel like winning. It didn't. It felt like the moment after you finally set down something heavy you'd carried so long you'd forgotten your arms could do anything else. That evening my grandfather met me in the lobby of my building. He didn't gloat. He didn't say I told you so. He reached into his coat and took out a single brass key, old and worn smooth, and he put it in my palm. I looked at it, not understanding. That's the cabin on the Metolius, he said. The one your father and I built one summer with our own hands before any of this. Your mother sold it out from under me 4 years ago while I was supposedly gone. His jaw tightened. I bought it back last week. It needs a new roof and the dock's half rotted and there's a structural engineer in the family who I'm told is very good. He almost smiled. It's not a gift, sweetheart. It's a restoration. Your father's still in those walls. I closed my hand around the key. It was heavier than a key should be. That night I sat in my apartment with the city lights below me, and I opened my laptop, and there it was. The folder? The case file. The forged signature, the Venmo snowflakes, the screenshots, the court documents, all of it. The whole ugly, meticulous record of being betrayed by the people who were supposed to be my foundation. I looked at it one last time, and then I selected it, and I right-clicked, and I deleted it, and I emptied the trash, and it was gone. For most of my life, I believed those people were my foundation. I thought a family was load-bearing by definition, that you held it up no matter what it cost you, because if you ever stepped out from under it, the whole thing would come down and it would be your fault. I designed buildings for a living, and I still believed that, because nobody had ever taught me the difference between a wall that holds the weight and a wall that just stands there, cracked, taking up space, fooling everyone into thinking it's doing a job. Here's what I know now. You can spend years convinced you're the only thing keeping a structure standing, and then one day you do the calculations honestly and you realize the building was condemned long before you ever shouldered the load. Removing a wall like that feels like destruction. It feels like the worst thing you could do, but sometimes the wall was never holding anything up. Sometimes it was just in the way of the demolition that should have happened a long, long time ago. I cut my load off a structure that was never sound, and I'm still standing, and so is everything that was actually worth keeping. If you've ever been the wall, the one everyone leaned on, the one who paid, the one who kept the peace until peace cost you your own foundation, I'd love to hear your story down in the comments. Tell me about the day you finally set the weight down. And if this reached someone who needs to hear that walking away isn't the same as breaking something, share it with them. And leave a like if you felt that load lift even a little. For 32 years, I thought love meant being the one who never put the weight down. My mother taught me that, not with words, but with the bill she handed me every time her performance got too expensive to keep up. And I paid it, over and over, because I believed that a good person carries whatever lands on her shoulders without complaint. That's the lie I want to take apart, because it nearly cost me everything I'd built. Here's what I missed for so long. The trouble in my family wasn't an accident, it followed a straight line, cause to consequence, the same way a crack travels through a beam under load. My mother spent and lied and forged because every single time someone covered for her, and that someone was me. I told myself I was being kind. I wasn't being kind. I was paying the electricity bill on a house that should have been condemned, and my brother kept the lights on burning my money because I let him. Walter saw it from inside that facility for 3 years and he refused to rescue me, and at the time it felt cruel, but he understood something I didn't. You cannot save a person from a fire they keep walking back into. He waited until I was finally ready to walk out on my own. What changed everything wasn't luck. It was 3 things I had to grow into. The first was the decision to stop confusing silence with goodness, to understand that letting someone harm you isn't loyalty, it's permission, and real character sometimes means saying the word no, and meaning it, even when the person across the door is your own mother. The second was learning to read what was actually in front of me instead of the story I'd been handed. I traced the load path. I called Priya. I stopped accepting paperwork at face value and started asking who signed it and why, and the moment I did that, the whole rotten structure showed itself. The third was simply the nerve to follow through when following through meant losing the only family I'd ever known. Cutting that wall loose was the hardest thing I have ever done, harder than any building I've ever held up, and I did it anyway. I don't feel triumphant when I think about that courtroom. I feel quiet. My mother forfeited her interest because she committed a crime against her own daughter, and that's not fate reaching down to balance a scale. It's just what happens when you build your whole life on a forged signature and someone finally checks the math. The cabin on the Metalius has a new roof now. I put it on myself. My grandfather sits on the dock most evenings, and we don't talk much, and that silence is the most honest thing I own. If you take one thing from what I lived through, let it be this. The people who tell you that walking away will break the family are usually the ones who are breaking you the whole time, and the bravest, clearest, most decent thing you will ever do is set the weight down and discover you can still stand.